What's cooking good looking? Today is all about the unique indie gem Lost in Random, made by the Swedish game studio zoinkgames. It's a bit as if somebody created a board game based on Alice in Wonderland, which then got adapted into a video game by Tim Burton. The recipe for it is based on one of Sweden's top exports, meatballs. In this case, we're doing meat cubes. 3 types to be exact. Normal, fruity, and cheesy. Same look, different flavors, because random rules.
Here's what you'll need for them. Breadcrumbs, ground pork, ground beef, an onion, salt, pepper, an egg, ground nutmeg, a mild cheese like Gouda, red currants, butter, flour, broth, potatoes, and heavy cream. Check out the recipe in the description for the exact amounts.
Lost in Random had big shoes to fill, because Zoink's previous game, the polygonal fairy tale Fee, ranks among my all-time favorites. So my expectations were kind of high. Thankfully, none of them were disappointed, and I loved every second of this weird, gloomy adventure. You play as a young girl called Even trying to find her sister Odd, who was taken by the evil queen. The journey is dangerous, but thankfully you have a little sentient dice buddy to help you out. And speaking of dice, let's get started on the meat cubes.
First, mix the nutmeg, the salt and the pepper together. Maybe try to be a bit more precise than I was, because you probably don't have editing magic. The next step is easy. You gotta peel the onion. But what comes after is probably one of the single most painful things you can do in the kitchen. Ever tried grating an onion? If you have a blender, you can also do your eyes a favor and use that instead. Thankfully, the only tears you might cry due to Lost in Random are tears of joy because you're having so much fun. Okay, that sounded a bit cringy, but seriously, the game design of Lost in Random is fantastic. Sound, story, mechanics and visuals fit together so well, I'd almost call it mesmerizing. Layer on layer on layer. For example, you start out with just your slingshot. Then you unlock the card, dice, strategy, action, combat, more on that later. And suddenly you're fighting in gigantic board game arenas, trying to survive a multitude of traps. The difficulty and amount of things you have to juggle simultaneously ramp up continuously, but it never reaches a point where it would become overwhelming. And let me tell you, the aforementioned combat system could have easily been the definition of overwhelming. Once you find Dicey, or Didi as it likes to call itself, enemies start finding you. First, you have to use your slingshot to destroy the crystals on their bodies. This doesn't do damage though. You have to then collect enough crystal energy to roll your dicey, and the number you roll determines the amount of action points you can spend on cards from your deck. Still with me? We're almost done. These cards will then turn into temporary weapons, health potions, or even field hazards. And throughout the game you unlock more and more of them, which is a good thing because the fights are also getting more and more complex. It's a lot to digest, I know. So why don't you do just that while you continue cooking? Thankfully, the next task is an easy one. Crack an egg into the onion mush, then add 1/3 of the spice mix and the breadcrumbs. Combine everything thoroughly and set it aside, so the crumbs can soak up some of the liquid goodness. Get 3 bowls ready. Fill 2 with the ground beef and pork respectively, take roughly half of each and put it in the 3rd bowl. Then distribute the egg, onion, spice, breadcrumb mix evenly into the bowls. Choices, choices, choices. Mix the meat with either your fingers or a spoon. Next, cut the cheese into 6 even cubes. Said cheese cubes will now get a little coat of sorts made out of ground pork. Comfy and easy to wear. I wonder who gets that reference. Once you're done with all 6 cubes, let them chill in the fridge. Divide the beef into 6 pieces and take the berries off their twigs. Flatten the beef balls into discs and distribute the red currants evenly on their centers. 4 berries per mini patty is a pretty good average. Next, close the little packages and carefully shape them into cubes without crushing the berries. Put them in the fridge to stay cool.
Yes, I know, the flavor doesn't actually change because of the shape, and balls are easier to shape than cubes, but I had my heart set on cubes. Sue me! Lost in Random is just so weird and playful and fun. It's contagious. That's what it is. I think a huge part of its charm comes from the absolutely superb voice acting. There's so many different accents and speech patterns and made-up words like grubblegagger. And some people even talk in a completely different language. My personal favorite is probably the Shadow Man though, who has this deep, rumbly, multi-layered voice that honestly gives me goosebumps.
Back to the less exciting stuff. Shaping the mixed ground meat into cubes. A dozen normal meatballs and a dozen special ones, 50-50, sounds like a good ratio for some random fun, doesn't it? Pour a splash of oil in a pan over medium-high heat. Add half the meat cubes and roast them from all sides. Here it actually comes in handy that we're making dice-shaped meatballs. Flipping them onto all 6 sides is certainly easier than trying to get an even roast on round meatballs. Once the cubes are nice and brown, remove them onto a plate and repeat with the rest. While the second batch is cooking, let's talk about my favorite thing in Lost in Random: the world and its unique atmosphere. While I really enjoy the combat, the world building is where this game really shines. Every step of the way you're reminded that you are no longer in Kansas, if you catch my drift. This isn't Earth. Even and Odd and some of the other characters might look human, but most inhabitants of 3 or 5 Tropolis really don't. Or maybe it's just me and you regularly talk to catfish wearing wigs. Thinking about it, that might not actually be the most unrealistic example, but you get what I mean, right? Wolf-rat creatures, upside-down scarecrow mayors, a trio of paranoid royal siblings, bags that eat people, and of course, sentient dice. There was a time in this world when everybody had a dice, and they used them constantly to compete and even to make decisions. The first question I thought of when I learned this little tidbit was, for some reason, how many shoes should I put on? Yeah, I know. So yes, for decades, maybe centuries, this world had a pretty good time. But everything changed when the wrong story. Everything changed when the queen decided that she should be the only one with a dice. What followed was the One Dice War, and the whole world, from Onecraft to Sextopia, suffered. However, is the queen actually a villain? Or is there maybe more to this seemingly black and white situation? Gotta play it yourself to find the answer to that question. I don't want to spoil all the fun. Speaking of spoiling, you don't want to burn the pan drippings, so lower the temperature under the now empty pan to medium and add half the butter. The next step is as monotonous as it is important. Add the flour to the melted butter, slowly, and never stop whisking. Continue to cook the mix like this until it starts to brown. I hope your arm isn't tired yet, because now you're going to add the broth, and yes, you guessed it, don't stop whisking. You don't want lumps to form, do you? Once the sauce is smooth, pour in the cream and whisk, whisk, whisk some more. Add the second third of the spice mix, stir the gravy, then add the meat cubes and their juices to the pan. Hope you picked one that is big enough. Let everything simmer while you prepare the side dish. I decided to go with mashed potatoes, but feel free to choose something else. Maybe some fancy pomme soufflé if that's your style. Peel the potatoes, dice them, and add the cubes to a pot filled with water. Don't be stingy with the salt. Bring everything to a boil, cover it with a lid and cook the potatoes on medium heat till they're tender. Finally, add the rest of the butter and the leftover spice mix to the still hot potatoes and mash everything together with a fork, or even better, a potato masher. If you want to have a smoother texture, feel free to add some milk. Otherwise, you're done!
Today's dish is pretty much the definition of hearty, homely, warm and comforting. I mean, mashed potatoes and hot gravy are pretty difficult to beat in this regard, don't you think? Evan's life, on the other hand, is far from any of those nice things. It sucks most of the time. And looking back, that's kind of a running theme for the game. I'm almost feeling a bit weird for being entertained by something that is so full of misery. But the fact remains, 100%, Lost in Random is amazing, you should play it. That's it for today. I hope you will enjoy eating these meatball cubes as much as I enjoyed coming up with them. The recipe is down there in the description, and if you decide to go for it, why don't you send me a picture or tag me in one? I'd love that. And while you're at it, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe, maybe even ring the bell. It really helps me out a ton. Hope your day's as good as gold. See you next time.